Hi, everybody. Good morning on the East Coast. I guess on the West Coast too. I'm your happy, healthy Dr. Alicia, and today we're going to have a really exciting and riveting conversation with Monique Farook. We're going to be talking today about infertility in Black women. And the reason why we're talking about this specifically today, this week, is because it is National Infertility Awareness Week. So with that, it's super important that we, speak about this issue because there are so many individuals who are challenged to have families. And it really affects people no matter what race, what religion, what sexuality, economic status. It really affects everyone. And infertility rates are actually on the rise. So it's super important that we, start to change the conversation around that and start to share our stories so that we can destigmatize infertility, particularly in the Black community. So we're just going to wait for Monique to join us. I hope everybody's doing well. Let's see here. Good morning, Nurse Tip Tip 77. So we're just going to wait for Monique to join us, and then we're going to go ahead and get started, everybody. So just hang tight, and we will get started. Let me just, let's see. 1 second, folks. Hope everybody's doing good. Okay, great. All right.
Hi,
Hi,
Dr. Alicia.
Monique.
How are you, dear?
Hi, Monique. How are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm actually really excited to have this conversation with you because, it is National Infertility Awareness Week. But I think there are a lot of issues about infertility that we don't really speak about, apart from
Yeah.
the I want to have a baby part. There's like so many other parts, right, to
Yes.
that.
Yes. Yes.
So yes, given that your extensive experience in this area, personal experience, also professional experience working with other people, I'm just super delighted to have this conversation.
I'm just
But
happy to be here. And
yeah,
congratulations on the new baby.
oh, thank you. Thank you. So let me give you a formal introduction. So this is Miss Monique Farook, everyone. She is a wife, a mom, a business owner, and a podcaster of the podcast Infertility and Me. You guys should definitely search that where you get your podcast. She's super passionate about advocating for her community and also being a voice for the silent sufferers of infertility. She's an enthusiastic woman who has created safe spaces to share and connect authentically around infertility. In the late summer of 2019, she created her podcast, Infertility and Me. It provides a compassionate environment for diverse stories about infertility, and it was created with the silent sufferer in mind, right? So this is
Yes,
super
ma'am.
important. So thank you so much for coming. Yeah, so this issue I think is it's really interesting because I find that more and more frequently I'm seeing more, women in the clinic who come in, particularly Black women, because most of my patients are Black or Latina,
Mm-hmm.
or Latinx, I should say, who come into the clinic with issues of fertility, but who've never been even evaluated or been offered any sort of even preliminary basic
Mm-hmm.
workup that could be done in the primary care doctor's office. We know that the statistics around infertility are that 1 in 8 couples experience infertility, and that Black women are 2 times more likely to experience. So we don't really know why, right? But that's
Mm-hmm.
generally the case. So what does National Infertility Week mean to you? And why do you feel like this week is important, particularly for Black women?
It's really important, I think, because what Resolve is trying to do is get people to pay attention with
Mm-hmm.
this week. And I'm a big advocate for going outside of the infertility, childless communities, lost communities, going outside of those spaces and going into more fertile spaces
Mm-hmm.
and speaking about infertility. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what ultimately what Resolve wants to do is
Mm-hmm.
to make it more visible in
Mhm.
hopes that, more outlets will begin to cover it,
Mhm.
media outlets specifically, and quite a few did pick it up this week. BBC, a
Mhm.
lot of like local places, New York. Allie from Infertile AF, she just was on CBS News last night in New York. She's a
Mhm.
journalist, and so she
Mhm.
has a lot of connections with, getting into outlets outside of just the online space that she's created or that we're in currently. And so I think it's
Mhm.
just important that fertile people know that it exists, because
Mhm.
it's 1 in 8 here in the
Mhm.
US. And then I think in the UK, it's like 1 in 4. It's a little bit
Mhm.
lower. I mean, a little bit more
Fire.
prevalent.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I just think that it's important for these types of awareness weeks, because we have like baby loss week, we have like rainbow baby loss. There's so many lost weeks, and so many
Mhm.
different, we have Earth Day yesterday. So like,
Yes.
I think the goal is to become as large as something like Earth Day, and to
Mhm.
give space and to hold space on a global level eventually for people suffering from infertility and losses.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And
Mm-hmm.
as you mentioned, Earth Day, we know that environmental justice is
Yes.
very intricately connected to reproductive justice. And we know that, environmental pollutants in some cases are contributing to reduction in sperm counts. We know that to be true, which, can be a cause of infertility. We haven't quite, determined that mechanism in women as of yet, but, it's quite possible that these environmental pollutants and climate change and the acidification of oceans and the,
Mm-hmm.
the contamination of the water and the overuse of plastics, all these things are potentially contributing,
Yeah.
but we
Yeah.
don't necessarily know. Um, but you also mentioned something very interesting, was just, trying to more widely publicize infertility as an issue that's actually a very common health issue that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
women, particularly Black women, face. Um, but it seems like traditionally the face of infertility has been like the rich, white Hollywood superstar who's like having, who's
Mm-hmm.
having infertility troubles. And these are the individuals who can also access services. So can
Mm-hmm.
you just share a little bit about your personal story with infertility and kind of how you found your place in your community as a Black woman in that space?
Yeah, it's a long story, Dr. Alicia, but I'll give you guys a brief synopsis. So, like in 2012, after my husband and I were married for 2 years, I was
Mhm,
diagnosed with right tubal blockage by a radiologist and had an HSG test done. And it
mhm,
looks into the woman's fallopian tubes and all those good things. And so I was diagnosed with right tubal blockage. I did a IUI immediately after that. It was unsuccessful. And then I never
mhm,
went back until 4 years later in 2016, the spring of 2016. My husband and
mhm,
I, and especially him, he's like very ambitious young man. So he's always like, we could do it. We could do
mhm,
anything we put our mind to, kind of thing. So it didn't happen. It just never happened. And I had never been pregnant prior to my
mhm,
son either.
mhm,
So, and then 4 years later, we go back. The right tubal blockage was gone, but I was having issues with my thyroid where I wasn't making enough. I wasn't producing enough. So I had hypothyroidism. Was treated
mhm,
for that for 3 months before I could move forward with an IVF cycle. And then
mhm,
during that time, I also had to have polyps, some small polyps removed from my uterus, some
mhm,
small growths. And I did my first egg retrieval to put it together with my husband's sperm. And for anybody who's never researched the nature of IVF. They retrieve the egg, they put it with the sperm, and then they hope that they will create an embryo. And it didn't happen the first time. And so it wasn't until the second time, the next month in August of 2016, that I actually became pregnant from a successful cycle of IVF treatment. And
mhm,
I actually had what's called natural cycle IVF treatment, which
mhm,
is where it's less medicated.
mhm,
And I only had the triggering shot for hormones to do the
mhm,
egg collection, and they only take one egg, and so they allow my body to do what it does naturally, and so
mhm,
it decreases pregnancies. They don't transfer more than one egg in at a time with natural cycle, and it's just very much less invasive, a lot less hormones, and it's a little bit cheaper too as well. And
mhm,
because I was under 35 at the time, I was a prime candidate for it, and it was successful for me. And then I gave birth prematurely at 24 weeks, 4 days,
Mm-hmm.
in January of 2017. So that's like
Mm-hmm.
the short version of everything.
Yeah, I mean it. I mean that's the short version, but I'm sure there's tons of like nuances in between,
Oh yeah, you know.
including how you were able to kind of communicate and share your journey with your family, your immediate family, and kind of what their reactions were because infertility is like super stigmatized in the Black
Hmm.
community, right? Like
Yeah.
speaking about issues about trying to conceive, particularly since we're constantly grappling with these stereotypes about us, about being hypersexual and hyperfertile, having all these kids, you know, which in many cases just is not, it's just not true,
Mm-mm,
you know?
mm-mm.
So how did you kind of begin to start those conversations with your family about your journey around
I
this?
didn't. I didn't, Dr. Alicia. I was the
Okay.
silent sufferer that you
Yeah.
hear most women of color, not just Black women, but other women of color from all over. It's like this with all people of color communities.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in other communities, it's even worse than with the Black community as far as
Mm-hmm.
reaching out for support and letting people in, and then also getting diagnosed, properly diagnosed too.
Yeah.
You know. And so yeah, I didn't do it. I just told my mom, my dad, and I, like a couple years later, I told my grandmother. And
Mm-hmm.
then by the time 2016 came, it was still only those three people that really knew.
Mm-hmm.
And there just was never that conversation with anyone. I didn't want to be a burden to anyone. It
Mm-hmm.
was kind of that thing. I didn't have very many friends, and so there wasn't like a push or a pull to like really tell anybody in that aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have any friends that got pregnant during that time. My sister did become pregnant, had one of my nephews at that time, and I was there to support her. And there was no love lost, and there was no jealousy there because I just wanted her to be healthy. She was over
Mm-hmm.
35, and I just wanted her to have a healthy pregnancy and you know, make it through maternal
Mm-hmm.
birthing and all that stuff. So there, because I was so closed off about it, it just became to the point where I just wanted to let people in, and I was just in a different mindset, and I was different as a woman at that time
Mm-hmm.
when I went back to get IVF, and so I just started letting people in, and I was just like, you know, I was diagnosed with infertility, and I told my sister I was diagnosed with infertility in 2012. I didn't say anything because I really didn't know how to deal with it myself. And I wanted to be in a place, in a position where I was coping with it okay before I even let anybody in. Because I don't like a lot of questions at one time. I can't do it. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
just can't do it. And so I just acted like it didn't exist much of the time,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, is
Mm-hmm.
what a lot of us do. And so when I did begin to speak out about it, I received a lot of comforting comments, just people holding
Mm-hmm.
space for me, just calling to say, hey, just want to check everything went okay. Like, you have to tell me specifics and stuff like that, you know. So it was great once I opened myself up, and it was a lot better than I thought it would have been compared
Mm-hmm.
to a lot of other people who have to deal with like religious parents and family members
Mm-hmm.
who are like, no, you don't mess with God's work.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that whole
Yeah.
thing. Like, I wish somebody would say something to me like that. But yeah, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that's real life though. People really do go through that. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. I mean, that it sounds like you went through a period where of quite a few years where you kind of
Hmm.
kept this
Hmm.
to yourself and you were holding
Hmm.
on to it. And I know even for people who do have a ton of support around them, it can still be a very isolating experience.
Hmm.
Um, Particularly as you kind of like go into doctor's offices, particularly
Yeah.
as a woman of color, and you kind of look around.
Hmm.
How can you tell us a little bit about what your experience was just with the culture of like
Hmm.
your doctor's office and seeing other individuals there who may or may not have looked like you, or even the brochures they hand
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
or
That's
even kind
real.
of speaking specifically about people's cultural backgrounds, or that kind of thing. Can you just describe a little bit about the culture of the IVF experience?
Yeah, the first clinic that I went to and got the first diagnosis in 2012 was in Pennsylvania,
Mm-hmm.
and we lived in a very predominantly Caucasian area. And so
Mm-hmm.
the clinic that I went to was a private location. It wasn't like a franchise location, and
Mm-hmm.
so it was very Caucasian. You know, the whole staff was Caucasian. The doctor was Caucasian,
Mm-hmm.
and they actually acted like they were surprised to see me there.
Uh-huh.
It and you know, you just catch that vibe. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's much of what Black women and Black men experience in any space that they go
Right.
into,
Right.
where they are not the majority or more prevalent. It's not a very
Right.
diverse space. And so
Right.
we pick up on those things that other people would never pick up on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's most people of color for the most part. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I went, it was very Caucasian. But then when we moved from Pennsylvania and came back home to Maryland, I found a doctor in Virginia. They have a couple of locations in Maryland and in
Mm-hmm.
DC and in Virginia, but it was a very diverse staff. It was
Mm-hmm.
really diverse. It was very different from the first one that I had been to, just
Mm-hmm.
because DC and Virginia is so multicultural. Not
Right.
every area of Virginia, but Northern Virginia, close to DC and the capital and all that stuff, is, very diverse staff. There was a lot of Latinx women and men
Mm-hmm.
working on staff as nurses and things like that, embryologists and such. And
Mm-hmm.
then the environment with the patients was still very much Caucasian, but there was
Mm-hmm.
a ton more of diversity. And I think a lot of it is geographical too, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of the culture of the clinic. And that
Mm-hmm.
makes a big difference. And that's why I wanted to go to this specific doctor. Shout out to Dominion Fertility. And it
Okay.
was founded
Dominion.
it was founded by a Caucasian man 40 years ago, and his staff. He has two female doctors, which was fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
Because trying to find a female RE is like crazy, and then
Interesting. I did not
and
even know that.
yeah, it is. It's really hard in certain areas. That's why I say a lot of this stuff is geographical,
Mm-hmm.
because it just depends on where you are and how and what kind of communities are around you. And I lived at the time 45 minutes from the doctor's office, but even
Mm-hmm.
where I lived, it's very diverse. And so it's much different than when I was in Pennsylvania, and it's a much
Mm-hmm.
more Caucasian space, specifically where I was close to Harrisburg and stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was completely different. And so I was able to let my guards down, because that's what
Mm-hmm.
when I go somewhere, I'm looking for a place that I can let my guard down and I can just be,
Yeah.
and be the patient and not have to
Mm-hmm.
be on guard about everything else. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was just like really a blessing, just finding them and then realizing how diverse they were,
Mm-hmm.
in person. And
Mm-hmm.
the staff being they were very diverse as well, racially, and just the overall atmosphere. I would always go back to them. I don't care where I live. Yeah, for
Nice.
sure. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I'm glad that you had a wonderful experience. And, whether we're going to the reproductive endocrinologist or
Yeah.
we're going to a primary care or OBGYN, we are all just kind of seeking spaces where we can feel comfortable, where we can feel supported, where we can see ourselves reflected
Mm-hmm.
in the literature that you give me, in the posters on the wall, in the staff,
Yeah.
in the doctors. Like that's just super, super, super important. And there are tons of studies,
Yeah.
on this that really shows that, racial concordance in particular, can really improve outcomes, patient outcomes, just because there's
Yeah.
a lot of things that are just simply understood, that you don't necessarily have to speak about it. You don't necessarily have to justify, your
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
humanity or even
Mm-hmm.
your desire to want to expand your family
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
someone, to another person of color.
Yeah.
Also kind of playing off some of those racial tropes from the past. Is like, oh, Black women don't deserve to like have more
Yeah.
kids, or,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. And that's, runs antithetical to reproductive justice. We all have the right to have children, not have children,
Mm-hmm.
and to also parent our kids in a fruitful, safe environment.
Yeah, and my doctor was a
So,
female, and she wasn't only
uh-huh.
just a female, but she was not U.S. born. She
Yeah,
was a foreign woman, and she wasn't a woman of color, but she's a foreign woman. And so,
yeah,
just even that was comfort enough for me, because I did not want to go through it with the male doctor. But
yeah,
since I've gotten to know the male doctor and the founding doctor of the clinic, I would be more than happy to be a patient of theirs if something happened to my doctor. But going into it, no, I didn't want to be cared for by a male doctor. I needed that extra little bit of care and concern that a woman can provide, and nurturing concern.
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
all of it is just so important, really is.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. I actually had a trip to the reproductive endocrinologist as well when we were trying for my son.
Okay.
When I luckily when I had arrived to my first appointment, I was already pregnant and didn't know
Yeah.
it, but so I didn't really need their services.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but still, I remember they decided that they wanted to follow me for the first 8 weeks of the
Mm,
pregnancy, just because I
mm,
had already like established myself as a patient and
right.
all of that. And they just wanted to make sure that the pregnancy was on the right track. But yeah, like, ugh, I feel like
Yeah, Dr. Alicia.
there's
Yeah.
just a lot of this awkwardness, especially
Mm-hmm.
when it's like the person clearly like is trying like there's not even really an attempt to try to understand like, oh, what's the motivation behind, what, tell me a little bit about yourself, or like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
just
Mm-hmm.
like it just
Very,
felt so
very
uncomfortable
cold.
and
It can
awkward.
be really cold. It could really be
Really
a,
cold,
yeah.
calculating, and also just in the treatment, how they treat your body, how they touch your body. I mean, I had one person who did an ultrasound who was just so rude.
Mm,
My physician who I had been seeing couldn't see me, so he asked one of his partners to see me at another practice, and he was so nasty about it. Like I was just
mm,
like, really, I'm supposed to undress with that, with your attitude, like to expect
crazy.
people to then be okay with being examined with this like whole like I don't have time for you today attitude. Like what is that? Like I don't know if it had anything to do with the fact that maybe he was just so busy, he was overbooked, or that I'm a
Mm-hmm.
black woman, who knows, or that
Right, right.
but it just felt really not good, and these are
Yeah.
the kinds of things that like create traumatic experiences, healthcare mediated bias and trauma
Mm-hmm.
toward patients. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, it is like the experience is super important, right?
It really is. And unfortunately, doctors are a lot of times overbooked,
Yeah,
and not just in spaces like in the ER or anything like that. But a lot of these doctors are overbooked,
they are. It's
and
true.
and, and if they could find a way to just slow it down, you know what I mean? But
It
you can't. It's money driven. It's money
is.
driven. It's not patient care driven most of the time anymore. It's
Right.
so much different than it was than like when our parents were coming up,
Absolutely.
and so that plays a big part of it too. Everything is just so money motivated, and
Hmm.
it's like you go to the hairstylist to get your hair done, and she overbooks because she's just trying to make those extra few dollars, even if she's
Yeah.
there till 12 a.m. at night.
Yeah.
So I think the culture of the healthcare field in general is not patient centered.
No, it's not. Unfortunately, and
Yeah.
providers have definitely play a role
Mm-hmm.
because of the interpersonal like negativity and bias
Mm-hmm.
that we perpetuate toward patients. And that's not to say that it's just white doctors; it's black doctors as well
Yeah,
that
it's
can
happening with
carry the
everybody.
torch. Yeah, of
Yeah.
patriarchy and racism as well, because this is just the culture into which we've been indoctrinated.
Yeah.
Um, but it's yeah, unfortunately we don't have a lot to do with that. A lot of it is systemic, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times we don't control our schedules, or there's administrators, or if your clinic is owned by a hospital, they expect you to meet certain numbers, there's like
Yeah, it's a
productivity
business.
goals. Yeah, it is.
It's a
So it's
business.
like ultimately it's kind of like the doctor and the patient are kind of sandwiched in the middle of this
Mm-hmm.
behemoth of a system that's kind of controlling everything and pulling the strings.
Yeah. Yep.
So
Yep.
but yeah, you mentioned a little bit about the cost of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how
Mm-hmm.
in many cases, seeking infertility treatments, or even getting diagnosed, like getting basic workup. I mean, well, many people don't even think to even offer basic workup to women of color, but when you actually finally get to the reproductive endocrinologist, that, in many cases it's not covered by insurance, which creates also another disparity in women who have
Mm-hmm.
access to this.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit how you kind of navigated the whole financial side of this? Because that is a huge piece of this story also for people who want to seek treatment.
Yeah. So like my husband and I are self-employed, and
Uh-huh.
I've been self-employed since I've been with him. And so
Uh-huh.
it's been well over a decade since I've worked for anyone with any insurance. And
Mm-hmm.
so at the time when I went back to get the infertility treatments, we already had our nest egg and our savings and stuff like that, in good shape.
Mhm.
but we didn't have any medical insurance. And
Mhm.
right around the time when I went, they had just started implementing coverage in the state of Maryland as
Okay.
mandatory. It was right
Oh.
around that time when they started really hitting it hard with insurance
Mhm.
companies and insurance company offering one or two cycles or three cycles or such like that,
Mhm.
or having a cap on how much money you could spend towards creating, having IVF treatments or fertility treatments in general.
Mhm.
And since I didn't have insurance, we knew that we have to pay out of pocket. And you know, no matter what, the average couple goes through more than three cycles with
Mhm.
IVF statistically. And
Mhm.
so at some point, whether you have insurance or not, you're going to have to come out of those pockets, you know.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then with the medication, you're always coming out of the pocket with
Mhm.
medication. They don't cover, a lot of people who have insurance that covers just a little bit they don't cover all of the medication costs. Medication
Mhm.
costs for some of these women is costing like $8,000 and $10,000 easily,
Wow. Wow.
easily,
Wow.
easily, depending on
Per
what,
cycle, or is it just like
per
per?
cycle,
Wow. Okay.
easily, because what happens is she may have low ovarian reserve, and so
Mhm.
she has to have medication hormones for that being
Yeah.
injected into her every day. And so you think about 30 days in a month, it's a lot of medicine, and somebody's
Yeah.
injecting themselves twice a day or once a day. It's a
Yeah.
lot. And so then, you know, it starts to really, really, really add up. And for us, we knew that we were automatically just going to have to pay. We're self-employed. We have insurance when we feel like it, when we really need to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Pretty much. And so we like, okay, well, we know we're gonna have to pay all this money. We know we're gonna need at least 20 grand. So the thing was, is are we gonna pay the 20 grand, or are we not gonna pay the 20 grand and continue to just see if a miracle happens?
Right. 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 Right.
And to be honest, a lot of times it feels like an investment in like making a real estate decision or
Right.
a financial business investment because
Right.
of the amount of money that it
Yeah.
costs to do IVF. And
Uh-huh.
I've heard that in California, even to do IUI is
Uh-huh.
much more expensive than it is here on the East Coast, much more
Wow.
expensive. And
Yeah.
so that's why I say geographics plays a big part in how much money people are spending
Mhm.
and exactly what their experiences is like with the RA, because you're talking about people who live in like rural communities who may have to drive an hour or two to even get to their reproductive endocrinologist, and
Right.
then there may be the only reproductive endocrinologist within in a 2 hour 3 hour period, you know,
Yeah.
and they're
Yeah.
very limited in their choices. And
Right.
I just happen to live somewhere where there's a lot of reproductive endocrinologists to choose from, but
Right.
unfortunately everybody doesn't have that choice. And then with having natural cycle IVF, it's significantly cheaper than the cost of traditional IVF from the jump.
Uh-huh.
And so that saved us a ton of money. We ended up not even spending the whole 20 grand.
Uh-huh.
And I was just very fortunate that I didn't have to do another cycle. And they do give you discounts when you do more than one cycle and you're paying out of pocket.
Mhm.
They give you discounts for things like that. And so I think we ended up spending about like 16, just like right at $16,000
Mhm.
for both egg retrievals, and then the first egg retrieval that was unsuccessful, and then also the one that was successful. And
Mhm.
so I just think that it's unfortunate that so many people, you know, within the 50 states are still, they don't have any help at all, not even
Right.
just a little bit. And I just come across so many people in my personal life, like for instance, I have a longtime friend, and he has male factor infertility issues.
Mhm.
And he has a stepdaughter that he's raised since she was a little girl.
Mhm.
And he was like, sis, I just didn't want to pay the money. He was like, I have
Mhm.
it.
Yeah.
I just can't see
Yeah.
myself paying so much money, 20 grand
Right.
off the top of everything,
Right.
and not having any guarantees. And that's what people think about. We, you know,
Yeah.
adults, we look for guarantees. Okay.
Right.
We need this guaranteed thing to happen if I'm going to spend this money.
Right. It's a
And that's
lot of
why I say,
money.
yeah. And that's why I say it's like a business transaction,
Mhm.
because you're taking the risk, not
Mhm.
knowing what the outcome is going to be exactly. And if you do the math, it's still nowhere. It's still a way better decision to put your money into some stocks and bonds than to put it into IVF. It really is,
Yeah.
the return on the investment. So um, I just hate that people have to make that decision. But I also advocate for people, if you don't have it, don't do it.
Yeah.
Don't spend all of your savings trying to have
Mhm.
this baby.
Mhm.
Don't do it. It sucks, and it is what it is.
Mhm.
It really is. And if we didn't have it, we wouldn't have done it.
Yeah. Yeah.
We wouldn't have
Yeah.
done it.
I mean, people shouldn't really be forced, and well, let me just back up in saying that in many cases, people consider being able to expand your family as a human right, in many countries, right? And
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
why
Hmm.
there's this culture, particularly as it relates to insurance, around like being able to provide financial support for
Hmm.
families who wish to do so. But that's obviously not the case in this country. The good thing
Yeah.
is that the tide is starting to turn.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm finding that many of my friends now who have commercial insurance, not my insurance, of course, because my
Hmm.
don't cover nothing, but but that their insurances do cover at least IUI. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah.
by the way, everybody is intrauterine insemination, where they basically just inject sperm into the uterus, which is supposed to increase the chance of fertilization.
Yeah.
So
Doesn't have
it's
to do
usually a
so much
much less.
work. The sperm doesn't have to do so much work to get to the
Yeah,
uterus, right?
it's much less invasive. And it's generally much cheaper.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so, but I'm glad that insurances now are starting to kind of see this as an issue
Hmm.
that's important, and that, by not covering it is an issue of discrimination,
Hmm.
um, to not offer that to women.
Yeah, because
So,
they
or
don't
other
see it as a
individuals
medical
who are
condition.
trying. Yeah,
That's the thing. They don't see it as a medical condition.
right.
And I think it's going to take, some more action with the government
Mm-hmm.
to enforce these laws, at least to cover a certain amount of cycles, and making sure that medication is included with that. Because sometimes like
Yeah,
I said, they'll cover the cycle, but they won't cover the medication. They make you pay for it,
yeah,
and so even that is somebody's savings a lot of times if you're talking about 3 different cycles.
right,
And so I think the other issue with insurance company is they see, in society as a whole, they see having children as a choice.
right. And as a privilege, right?
Yeah, they see it as a choice. Well, if you can't afford to do it, you shouldn't do it. That's what a lot of
Right,
people will say, even for
right,
people who have infertility. They'll be like, well, if you don't have the money, then maybe you shouldn't be
right,
trying to have the baby
right,
if you can't pay for the treatment.
right.
But let's the average, the average, what statistically, a man over the age of 35 who makes $400,000 or more is what, less than 10%.
Mm-hmm,
And that's somebody who will be able to pay for it comfortably,
mm-hmm.
is what I'm trying to, what my point is. That. And so you're talking about people who making, maybe even 120 grand a year. They may not have it,
Yeah,
because we have homes.
yeah. People have bills. They have,
We have bills. We have
people may. Oh yeah,
college things we're still paying for,
oh yeah.
And so
People
you're
have
talking
debt.
about a couple who makes 120, 50, or $200,000 between the two of them. They may not have it the extra loot to spend. They have it
Yeah,
saved. They have money saved, but not to spend
maybe,
on that. And then we're talking
maybe
about,
they do. Maybe they don't.
maybe they don't, and that's the thing about it that makes it so frustrating for people, and that insurances are not helping to cover it, because even though it is a choice to have a baby, it's still a medical diagnosis. That's the thing that insurance companies are not really taking
Yeah,
into consideration.
yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. So you have done. You're. By the way, you guys need to go to her IG page. It's really funny. She creates these really funny videos that, kind of really shed light on infertility issues and kind of what's going through the mind of someone who's suffering with infertility, but has this very like clever comedic spin on it. So I think that like your content is awesome.
Thank you,
And
Dr.
always, I
Alicia.
think that's how I even found you, as I
Yeah, I think
was
so. Yep.
scrolling and I was like, oh
Mm-hmm.
my God, this is so brilliant. So, but how did you start kind of, well, one, what's the motivation for creating your content? Like, how did you kind of create this comedic spin? Because infertility is often not a funny
Mm-hmm.
topic. So,
No,
why did
not
you
at all.
decide to kind of make it funny? And
Mm-hmm.
also just like your motivation for your podcast, and,
Well, look,
and how
yeah.
you found the power, the resilience to create
Mm-hmm.
these things for
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
others despite your own experience.
Well, look, it was healing for me. It all started with me writing my story on in my computer as a
Mm-hmm.
book, in book format. And so from there, I was like, okay, well, maybe I won't publish the book, but maybe there's something I can do to be of service to someone else in the community, sort of
Mm-hmm.
like a nonprofit does. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm a longtime podcast listener myself, and so
Mm-hmm.
that is why I created the podcast. And I said, well, I can do this thing. I can do this. This is
Mm-hmm.
this will be easy and it'll be fun too, right? And I
Uh-huh.
get to meet different people and people from all over the world and connect with people and organizations. And so the late summer of 2019 is when I created the podcast, and then I launched it November of 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And so this past September, after being on Instagram for a year and having the podcast for a year, I was like, something different is needed here.
Mm-hmm.
What are we missing here? Something
Mm-hmm.
is, what's going on? Because you're scrolling, and most of the people that I follow are within the community and organizations and other doctors
Mm-hmm.
like yourself. And so I'm like, what can we do? There's something's got to give here, because it's very depressing. Let's
Mm-hmm.
just be honest. When you're scrolling, it's very depressing. And that's fine, because people need an outlet and they need a space to share and they need to feel safe doing so. And so I was like, something's got to give. And so here comes Instagram with these reels back in like September, October.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
I thought so the first time I did a reel, it was like hump day. And I was like, it's hump day, guys. Da 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 da. She was like, really, I was dancing in the video or whatever to some reggaeton. And
Mm-hmm.
then after that, a light bulb went off. And I was like, it's comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Comedy's missing here.
Mm-hmm.
There's no comedy. And the woman from New York, who is the page owner of Hilariously Infertile, she's been doing comedy for a long time centered around fertility struggles, but her
Mm-hmm.
comedy is very different from what I do in reels. And she
Mm-hmm.
makes a lot of memes. She's
Mm-hmm.
centered around memes, and she's like really sarcastic, like kind of comedy, cynical kind of comedy a little time sometimes. And so I wanted to really just make people laugh, like, a general comedic feel.
Mm-hmm.
And so a light bulb went off, and I was like, one day I was just sitting in the house. I was like, isn't it funny how, like, we go to the doctors and they're getting ready to check our private parts, but we hide our underwear. And so
It's
then they
true.
just, and so that just
You're
was
like,
like one of
I
the,
don't want you to
yeah.
see. Let
So
me
that was like
fold
one
it
of my
between my
first,
pants.
yes. So I'm like, oh, I got to make a reel about it. So I figured it out, worked with it for about an hour to figure out how it works, because I wasn't on TikTok. And so it's much like TikTok, but
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't on TikTok then. And so I said, oh, let's do a video. And people responded well to it. And I was like, hey, I am kind of funny, huh? I guess I am. So then it just kept going and just kept going. And I think I was looking for, after, like I said, after the first year, I was like, something is missing in the community, and I got to figure out what it is. And that was
Mm-hmm.
it. We needed more laughing.
Mm-hmm.
We needed to laugh more about this
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, your content is awesome. You guys should definitely follow her Infertility and Me podcast. It's really funny. And then she also has her podcast as well. Can you tell us a little bit about when you air so people can also tune in?
Yeah, there's about 100 episodes this far, for the last year and a half that I've been doing the podcast. There's
Mm-hmm.
anonymous episodes where people don't reveal the identity. Normally, I have the IG page or the website of the guest on the show, but I have started creating anonymous episodes for people who want to share but don't want to reveal their identity. I've had public figures on who have
Mm-hmm.
shared. They work for like politicians,
Mm-hmm.
and people who work for the military who don't want to reveal their identity. And I just create a fake name or whatever, and we go from there, and they tell their story. And a lot of them are really still in the thick of it. And then
Right.
I have success stories, of course, on there. I've had specialists like yourself on there,
Mm-hmm.
and just a wide variety of stories. LGBTQ plus IA. I've
Mm-hmm.
had Latinx women on, men on, therapists, childless after infertility, child free not by choice, that community as
Mm-hmm.
well, and single
Yeah.
moms trying to
Mm-hmm.
conceive that haven't found love,
Mm-hmm.
and just a wide variety of people to touch everybody, you know what I
Yeah.
mean, and to have space for anyone who comes across the podcast. I don't know if I'll produce any more podcast episodes at this point, but I will always be on Instagram for sure,
Mm-hmm.
because I definitely don't want to abandon the community, and I'm really starting to connect with some media outlets and places that I can, and organizations that I could help, so I don't have to start my own nonprofit, because it's a lot of work, you
Yeah.
know, you know.
I hear
So
you. So, you have kind of become an expert, not only in your experience, but in just listening and kind of creating this community of individuals like yourself. What would you recommend, or what advice would you give for people who are undergoing like fertility treatment right now, or who are
Mm-hmm.
suffering from infertility, and how do they find community and support?
Yeah, you can find community with the hashtags, you guys.
Mm-hmm.
If you're on Instagram, use the hashtags and use the heck out of them. More
Mm-hmm.
recently, there are hashtags related to specific racial groups, like, for instance, Black IVF experience, Black women in
Mm-hmm.
infertility.
Mm-hmm.
Um, then there's women of color in infertility for any racial, ethnic background. And then there's also hashtags like trying to conceive over 35, trying to
Mm-hmm.
conceive over 40. Take advantage of the hashtags. You'll come across a lot of different type of people. Male factor hashtags, childless not by choice hashtags, trying
Mm-hmm.
to conceive, single. You can even look up infertility humor and you'll see all the humorous memes and videos and reels related to infertility and trying to conceive. And then community is at your fingertips, but you just have to take the initiative to put yourself out there, whether you have an open and public page or whether it's an anonymous page. There's many, many, many anonymous pages, and nobody has to feel pressured to be public with their story. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
not for everyone. And then there's also people that follow me who have no profile picture. They're
Mm-hmm.
just here to consume content, and they
Right.
find community like that. So you have to figure out what community means to you and what
Mm-hmm.
you need in that
Mm-hmm.
moment and that time. And my DMs are always open, as well as many other podcast ladies who are in this space, like Infertile AF, Fat Fertility.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's so many different podcasts for so many different personality types. I'm not for everyone. I know this. And so there's so many different podcast resources and blogs and communities
Mm-hmm.
um, to get more intimate off of Instagram as
Mm-hmm.
well. And then give yourself some grace too. Like, it's a lot to
Mm-hmm.
get a diagnosis. It's kind of traumatic a little bit when you get a diagnosis
Yeah.
because it's very unexpected if you don't have a condition that you were diagnosed with as a teenager, say like with
Yeah.
PCOS,
Yeah.
you know,
Or
and then a
you're
lot.
generally healthy and you've never had any medical problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Which is who I was, you know. And then you
Mm-hmm.
get women who don't find out until they're 30 years old that they have endometriosis, and they've been trying to figure out why they've had all this pain these years with their
Mm-hmm.
menses, you know, and men not knowing that they don't produce any sperm or that their
Mm-hmm.
sperm count is very low. And so, you know, you just have to listen to yourself and pay attention to what it is that you need, and let your spirit guide you on what direction to go in and who to connect yourself with, and know that you don't have to follow everybody. Follow
Mm-hmm.
those who you resonate with.
Right.
Follow those who you resonate with, who speak your same language,
Mm-hmm.
and you're always safe with me. I'll tell you that much. I've grown up around many different ethnic backgrounds. My husband is South Asian, so I pretty much have been had relationships for many years with various ethnic groups, which is why I think a lot of people from all over kind of draw to me,
Mm-hmm.
um, because I just have that experience, and I guess it resonates with people. But when you're going into fertility treatments, whether it's IUI or whether it's just using medicated cycles for Clomid, that's all you're doing, or if it's infertility treatments, IVF treatments, I'm sorry, know that you have the choice to do whatever is best for you.
Mm-hmm.
And if that means changing your RE clinic, finding a new
Yes.
doctor, getting a second opinion, because a lot of
Yep.
women who are not, I hate to say the word naturally overweight, but there are women who have always been kind of overweight
Mm-hmm.
for their height and build, even as
Mm-hmm.
children. And so they have the issue, of course, when they become adults, and then they have PCOS or they have some other kind of condition, or either they're just overweight and they get discriminated against when they go to the reproductive endocrinologist and
Yeah.
says, I'm not treating you because I
Right.
don't I don't like to deal with BMI over 25 or 30 or whatever the case may be. And so
Right.
do what you have to do, you guys, because at the end of the day, you hire the doctor is not hiring you to do the job.
Right.
And
Right.
so that's big, is advocating for yourself and going where you feel safe. And then number
Mm-hmm.
two, staying open and honest with your spouse. So many people
Yes.
are divorcing because of infertility and the issues
Yeah.
that come along with it and the
Yeah.
trauma. I'm watching it right here on Instagram, and so then you have to allow those who you feel safe with, who are not infertile, hold space for you. Give them the opportunity to hold space for you. And if they aren't doing a great job at it, you can tell them, or you can just not let them in anymore, and you can close that part of your relationship off as far as sharing your journey with trying to get pregnant. And
Mm-hmm.
then three, be selfish. If you can't
Mm-hmm.
handle it, don't go to the event. Don't go
Mm-hmm.
around this person or that person or this environment.
Mm-hmm.
And then also making sure that you have a plan for what you will do if 3 cycles go by and
Yeah.
nothing has happened. And that
Mm-hmm.
was one thing I went from the jump. I was like, if it doesn't work in such and such amount of times, I'm not doing it again. And I was very honest with my husband. And you have to be honest with your spouse if you're doing it with a spouse. You have to
Mm-hmm.
be,
Mm-hmm.
because you're gonna need to be honest about
Yeah.
it, and they have to have the opportunity to be honest with you too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Wow. So much great advice, everybody. Yes, follow this woman. She's an expert. So, oh my gosh, thank you so much for your time today. This was
Oh
such a
yeah,
great
absolutely.
conversation. Just kind of highlighting why infertility is important, and also that it's something that's very common,
Yeah.
and that it's not only women, folks, with
Mhm.
infertility
Mhm.
issues. Men can have infertility
Lots of
issues
men.
also.
Yeah.
40% women, 40% men, 20% unknown. They don't know the
Yep.
odds. So
Yep. Yep.
just know
One in
that,
eight, you guys. If you're in the
one in
U.S.,
eight.
1 in 8. That's the grocery store. Whenever I go to the grocery store, I'm like 1 in 8. Like, are you serious? That's how common it is.
That's a lot.
That's
Yeah.
that's that's how common it is. So you're definitely not alone, and we're here for you. That's it.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, you guys. Please do check out some of the other resources on Monique's page as well. It's National Infertility Awareness Week, so we're just trying to bring awareness to this
Hmm.
issue,
Hmm.
particularly as it relates to women of color.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much for joining us,
Thank you so
Monique.
much.
Thank you,
It's so good
everybody who
speaking to you
tuned
again,
in
Dr.
today.
Alicia.
You guys have a fabulous Friday.
Have a great weekend.
Okay, bye bye.